You're listening to What the Washington, a historical, social, and political tour of the weirdest state in the nation. I'm Matt.
And I'm Mikayla.
And this is the last episode of the year 2024. And before the year closed out, I wanted to cover a topic that is a memorial to a very important event here in Bellingham. Before we get started, I just want to let our listeners know that our cat, Rosemary, is in the room with us. So if you hear any purring or shuffling, that's her.
We have a very special guest, Rosemary.
Well, it's mostly because if we lock her on the other side of the door, even though we're only in here and she's out in the main part of the house, she will just be... But yeah, that's her. So please pardon any intense sounds. But today's topic is about the pipeline explosion, the Olympic pipeline explosion in Bellingham in 1999. So that's 25 years ago. It happened 25 years ago in the summer of 1999, June 10th. Which is crazy to think about because when that happened, I did not live in the state at the time. I lived in North Carolina. We had moved away, but it did have a really big impact on the northwestern Washington area. So yeah, I'm just going to go through this and kind of go through a recap and talk about a little bit of the 25 years later and just go through this because there's a court trial, there's all kinds of stuff that I don't think a lot of people know about, but it's a byproduct of this particular incident.
And why did you want to talk about this before the year was over? Or why did you want to talk about it in general?
Well, yeah, it's a huge part of growing up in northwestern Washington. I mean, when I moved back, everyone talked about it, even living south of here in Bellingham. But then also, it's the 25th anniversary. So, I'm 31. This happened 25 years ago. It's most of my life. This is a thing that had happened. And also, I am a biologist, a scientist by trade, so both the human health impacts, but then also the impact to the ecosystem is a part of the resolution of the oil, or the gas. In this case, it's a gasoline pipeline, but the pipeline that exploded. So it's local history and it's environmental history. So you get to learn a little bit about pipeline law. Mm-hmm. But it's not going to be a very funny episode. I know that we had a pickleball episode.
Yeah, you said, I hope you enjoyed your holidays, and here is some depressing content.
Yeah, and if we had started earlier in the year, our podcast earlier in the year, so fall instead of, or I should say early fall instead of late fall, this would have been earlier, but because we didn't, and
it just shakes out that way. Sometimes, You know what? It's perhaps a good time at the end of the year for reflection.
Yeah. It's a memorial, right? At the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And
introspection.
It lets us, yes, it lets us think about where we are, who we are as a community, but then also lets us remember those that we've lost along the way, which in this unfortunate case, we lost several community members. So this incident begins with the Olympic pipeline, which runs from Cherry Point in Ferndale all the way to terminals in Seattle and Portland. It's a pretty long pipeline. And it runs gasoline that's refined at the Cherry Point refinery, which people don't know this about Bellingham. Whatcom County, huge petroleum-based economy in the refinery industry. Our soccer field in Whatcom County, Ferndale, is the ConocoPhillips athletic field. So it's a huge part of the economy, even still after this incident. At the time, in 1999, the pipeline was owned by a company called Equilon. So we're going to get all the like weird generic company names because this is all a bunch of oil infrastructure. But Equilon was a joint company between Shell Oil and Texaco. And now, ever since 2006, 7 years after this incident, they were bought by BP, which we all know from oil rig explosion in 2010. So this is, I mean,
known for their environmental safety.
Right. Well, they didn't even cause this one.
I know, but the association.
The association's
unfortunate
there
for them.
Yeah, and there was a pipeline valve shutdown, an automatic valve shutdown for an unknown reason. It wasn't a scheduled repair or anything like that. So the valve stopped working around 3 p.m. for an unknown reason. Then around 3:25, when the pipeline got back online, there was a massive pressure spike around 3:25, and this spike was caused because there was an improperly configured relief valve that was supposed to be activated when something like this happened on site. There's going to be a bunch of discussions about mechanical failure. This is almost an engineering episode, which I'm not an engineer, but I understand the basic pipeline ideas of a pipeline, like how it's supposed to work. So there's going to be a National Transportation and Safety Board investigation of this pipeline, NTSB, and they're going to break down all the little nuggets of like what actually happened. But one of the things they found was that valve. That massive pressure spike caused a rupture in the pipeline where we call Whatcom Falls Park. Mikayla and I are big fans of this park. It's a little bit above the downtown area.
Yeah, it's really close to Lake Whatcom.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
If people are familiar with Bellingham, it's like, if you're not familiar with Bellingham, it's not very easy to explain. It's not close to downtown, but it's also not far from downtown.
Right.
It's probably like 5-10 minute drive from that area.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And so this rupture happened around there. And the citizen, there were several citizens, but a citizen called 911 complaining about the smell of gasoline from the wetlands at the park and in the surrounding area. And of course they were like, I smell this. The pipeline's actually a little bit more northeast of the location, but when you're having a pipeline, it's just dumping it into the wetlands, and a lot of that wetland water doesn't move as fast, so it just builds up gasoline. Firefighters were dispatched about 3:45 time period because of the complaints.
Is it important for you to establish what Whatcom Falls Park is? Because if you're not familiar, like, I guess I can just explain it real quick, that it's like a dam-controlled river, and so it's a major salmon passage as well.
Yes, in a huge estuary area. And part of this story is also because of this explosion, a lot of damage is done to that ecosystem alongside the damage to people and property. So yeah, that's a really good way to explain it.
Yeah, so it's controlled by a dam. So usually there is there's always running water for the falls part of Whatcom Falls. Like, there's always a waterfall. But in the really rainy season, it's, like, barreling heavy
yes
water. So this was in July, though, correct?
Yeah.
So this would be some of the more mild waterfalls. A lot of people go swimming.
Fishing.
They're fishing. It's like a recreational park.
Yeah, it's very recreational. It's steep on both sides, and you have bridges that cross it on several points across the park. And there's big boulders. And at this time, there was a lot of bigger boulders than there are now that were where kids played, basically. But yeah, the smell of gasoline's building, and the firefighters are dispatched. At this point, at the pipeline head in Ferndale, someone calls headquarters. An employee calls headquarters about this incident. And what we find out later is that 236,000 gallons of gasoline are dumped into Whatcom. What we find out is that 236,000 gallons of gasoline are dumped into Whatcom and Hannah Creek, which is a lot. And Mikayla will tell you, or could confirm, they're not huge creeks in the sense of the distance between the ocean and the slowdowns in different parts of these creeks. So a lot of that gasoline can build up in one area, and that's what's about to happen. The path of the explosion essentially goes from a little bit south of one of the dam slowdowns around, it's north of, there is an explosion. Eventually there is an explosion at 5:02. So about 2 hours of gasoline buildup, then a fire starts in the park. The gas line is around Iowa Drive, a little bit east of Iowa Street, and then it goes all the way to I-5, basically.
Mm-hmm. Which is how much?
It's about 1.5 miles of fire, a wall of fire to the highway. So it's like the I-5 Iowa Street exit to Iowa Drive, which is like 1 mile that way. And
1 mile what way?
East.
Okay.
East of it. So I-5 cuts through Bellingham north to south, for our listeners. So the wall of fire is on the east side of the highway.
So basically from more or less Lake Whatcom to I-5.
Yes, basically. Almost about to that. A little bit less because the pipeline is below the dam, so it wasn't like the whole dam and then everything exploded. So the wall of fire starts spreading from that whole entire area, and as you know, Iowa Street's a very industrial area, but then south of Iowa Street, and south of the lake around Meador and Fraser is a lot of residential area. So the fire spread very quickly. It ignited, and the explosion was so large that it went 30,000 feet into the air. So you could see a mushroom cloud or plume. You could see a plume of smoke that was approximately 5 miles up in the air. You could see it from British Columbia, Vancouver, BC. And you could see it from Anacortes. That's how big it was.
And that's the cloud of smoke was that large? So how large were the flames?
About So it was all like a wall of fire, about 100, just going like this, basically. And it burned all the trees, too, which there were a lot of older trees there. The fire was about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which caused everything to broil, even the water. So there was like steam, hot steam, and smoke. The trees set on fire. The animals set on fire. Everything set on fire. Anything that could burn did burn during this, and that included people. And there were 3 people who lost their lives that day.
Do you know if they were more injured?
Yeah, there was, I believe, 8 others injured. 3 people killed, and a whole house just completely destroyed, and then a bunch of other houses and properties destroyed. I believe there was 4.5 million, or I believe there was $45 million in property damages, which is 1990s money. So that's
Sorry.
that's
Sorry.
that's not an insignificant amount of money, but the loss of 3 young people, they were not adults. June 10th is around when school ends. So there were a lot of kids out, and ultimately we lost 2 children and 1 adult, but a young adult. Steven Siorovas, who was 10, Wade King, who was also 10, and Liam Wood, who was 18. Steven and Wade would be 35 today, and Liam would be 43. They were all near the creek when the fire ball started, and they all died from the fire.
It's actually pretty incredible that more people did not get injured or die for a 100-foot fireball that traveled over a mile.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible that it was only 3 people who died,
Yeah. It's like it's one of those kinds of tragedies where you're even with the death count, and there are a couple documentaries that the city of Bellingham has about this, that it shows like people were actually like, oh, we're probably going to have like a lot of people die from this in the immediate, like just seeing it. And it is amazing that less people died. It's tragic that we lost anybody to this, that, in my opinion, completely avoidable incident. But the fact that less people died, I would say you can count on, 2 hands injuries and deaths, or almost 2 hands injuries and deaths. It was surprising learning about this because of how drastic the explosion was.
Right.
The issue with gasoline in specific is that it is quick to burn, but it burns out fast. So...
You mean that it burns hot?
Yes, it burns hot, it burns out fast, and once it burns, it doesn't linger. It's not like diesel or an oil fire, like a big oil fire, where it sticks to anything it touches, it burns anything it touches.
It's not going to Silent Hill Bellingham, is what you're saying.
No. And so that's why a lot of people think that it stopped at the highway, because it did not seep through the watershed enough. So when that fireball did happen, it stopped right at the highway. It's the luck of the draw that it was a gasoline pipeline rather than a diesel oil pipeline, or any kind of oil or industrial petroleum product. But like I said earlier, the pipeline company did an assessment, and they found that there was at least $45 million worth of damages, not including the three people who died, the three kids who died, and the 8 others who were injured. And I mean, you can't replace people, right? You can't. They're people's kids. And like I said, you cannot argue that it was completely unavoidable. So, there was an investigation, and it was a 3-year investigation. So by the time that I moved back, they were doing the investigation still. The NTSB, which is the National Transportation Safety Board, investigates when planes crash. They investigate when rail lines derail, but they also inspect pipelines because it's a method of transportation for goods, not just people. They investigated and found that there were several failures, several points of failure, and not just a single error that caused the pipeline to explode, the rupture. And the Olympic pipeline, they found that the Olympic pipeline company did not train their employees to properly respond to a crisis like this. And they also found that they were using faulty electronic controls and monitoring systems and pipelines to monitor the condition of the pipeline. So even if they had good equipment, or even if they had good training, the equipment was subpar to know what was happening up to date, real time. Also, in 1994, earlier, the city of Bellingham had a subcontractor which damaged parts of the pipeline as well. And it probably didn't damage it in like it's leaking gasoline today, but 5 years later, because they were building the water treatment plant, that water treatment plant. They were building a water treatment plant and they didn't notify the city of the damage that they had done to the pipeline, so it basically just went without any checks. But the problem is that the pipeline company, this is where it comes back to it being on the pipeline company, the NTSB found that the Olympic pipeline company didn't inspect the pipeline regularly enough to check for that damage. So they were just kind of like, oh, it works. Like on the monitor, it works. Mm-hmm. So when the explosion happened, it caught them by surprise because they're like, why is the pressure dip? Why is the pressure dip? But if they had inspected the pipeline, they would have seen this damage and taken the steps to rectify the damage.
So did they determine it was negligent then for the Olympic pipeline company?
That's where it's going to get interesting because they did go to court. Mm-hmm. Equilon Pipeline, the parent company that was run through a representative of Shell Pipeline Company, turned in a no plead contest to the charges that the company knowingly and willfully violated a regulation under the Hazardous Liquid Pipeline Safety Act, and negligently, and I put in quotation marks, caused the discharge of a harmful quantity of gasoline into navigable waters. It says, this is from the Natural Gas Institute staff report in 2002. So I went deep into the text of the industry.
Dug up the archives.
I went into the archives. This is from 2002, I believe. This was like big news for the oil industry, which considering the history of the oil industry, it's interesting to read internal company paper, like industry paper. The no contest plea has the same effect as a guilty plea in a criminal case, although it is not generally admissible in subsequent civil litigation.
Yeah, so it's basically the equivalent of saying you can penalize me as if I'm pleading guilty, but I'm not admitting fault. It's like settling out of court for criminal cases.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like I said, it's one of those, shrug shoulders. Equilon agreed to pay a criminal fine of $15 million and a civil penalty of $10 million to settle state and federal civil proceedings. And to comply with pipeline integrity spill and mitigation programs, they put aside another $61 million to the successor in interest of Equilon, because Equilon, I believe, they all knew was not long for the economic world for much longer after something like this. But ultimately, they were going to sell this infrastructure off to another company. So, that's also another point that when I was writing this and researching this, I always noticed that second tier of justice, where a company like this could do this and then be hands up.
Yeah, they have insurance for that.
But remember, these companies make billions of dollars. Yeah. So 10 million to a billion of profit is 10 cents to $100,000. You know what I mean? The scale. Mm-hmm. It's just not even a thing that you would even blink at losing, really.
Right.
However, Frank Hoff Jr., the Olympic manager, and Ronald Dean Brinston, the Olympic supervisor of product movement, which is also an interesting way to call pipeline the old
product movement.
Gasoline is product. I usually don't laugh in situations like this, but the names of some of the positions are just because I thought it was just going to be director of pipeline or infrastructure, because it is infrastructure ultimately, but it's product movement. They each pleaded guilty to felony charges of knowingly and willfully violating a regulation under the Hazardous Liquid Pipeline Safety Act. Wow. And they faced each up to 5 years in prison and a fine of $250,000. Kevin Scott Divig, the Olympic control operator, pleaded to a misdemeanor charge of negligently discharging gasoline into navigable waters and a violation of the Clean Air Act. And he faced 1 year in prison and $100,000 in fines. And then $4 million from the company was put aside to create the Pipeline Safety Trust, which was a institution, non-profit that was focused on checking pipelines and keeping gas companies honest.
Yeah, I think that's still around today. I'm pretty sure I know someone I went to school with, college with, works there.
Yep.
It's based up here in Bellingham, right?
Yeah, because of the pipeline explosion. But it is a big part of the culture of regulation of gas pipelines, oil pipelines, because it happened here, and so a lot of people here have that in their memory. The judge that oversaw the court case, federal judge Barbara Rothstein, admitted this conflict between the people and the oil company was like Bambi taking on Godzilla, and that's a quote. She said that.
Yeah.
Which is so depressing because we should have more accountability than what we do.
Yeah, it's the power and difference between citizen interest and corporate interest, right?
Right. In 2000, in the court case, King versus Olympic Pipeline, the Kings and the Seorvises sued for the wrongful death of their children, but they ultimately did settle for $75 million outside of court. So, which rightfully so, because it's an oil company.
Yeah, and I don't think they would have liked to face some, what are they called? Penalty fines? You know, like
for taking it to court and losing.
No, I mean, when you settle out of court, you control the end, right? And then even if you're in a court case, like, you can get awarded, like, if you are the one taking it against someone and you're only asking like $100 million, the court can award you that $100 million and then also give additional penalty. There's like a special term for it, but it's like additional penalty fines that they have to pay of like $50 million or whatever. So if you're the corporation, you want to settle out of court.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was the hardest part for me reading this and learning about this, was the fact that, like, the human, like, I understand, like, oh, you know, this happened so long ago, but these are people who are still in our community. And I mean, you go on Western, there's buildings named after Wade. There's, you know, schools. I mean,
yep. A few places.
These were people, you know, around our age. Now that I think about it, I'm 31. They would be 35. You know, I don't have any kids, but I wouldn't even know how I would. I don't know. It's so sad that they went up against this Goliath. And, you know, even though they, you know, tried to do the right thing, like, there's no, like, we are to fault for this. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel right. It's not what we get taught when we're in school. Like, you take accountability for what you did, and if you did something that got someone hurt, you got to take accountability for that. But in this case, there was just kind of like how oil companies operate. So after all of that happened, there were actual laws passed based off of this. Rick Larson, our congressman, helped propose additional legislation to pipelines.
He's been in office for so long.
Ever. For basically most of my...
Was he a U.S. Congressman at that point, or was he a state senator?
No, he was a congressman. I think he got elected in 2000.
Okay.
Like, the year 2000. So, he's been in for 24 years.
Yeah, it's a long time.
A long time. Because it's a 2-year term, too. So, that means he's, like, won 12 terms as congressman.
Yeah.
But he helped pass... him in Congress, Congressman Larson and a large percentage of the House passed the Pipeline Safety Improvement Act of Congress. Representative Larson, as a part of Congress, worked in 2002 to pass the Pipeline Safety Improvement Act of 2002, which increased the safety protocols of pipeline infrastructure across the U.S., which made them basically actually have to inspect their pipelines.
Yeah, which they should have been
more
doing
regularly.
Anyway. Yeah.
Right? it is kind of like, wow, we have to tell people to do that. And ultimately, the most difficult part, I'm gonna get on my soapbox a little bit.
Okay.
We had the Olympic pipeline has also leaked in the 2020s twice in different locations, not just in Bellingham. So it leaked in Woodinville in 2020, causing the Department of Ecology to have to go out and clean that site up. And the Olympic pipeline also ruptured in Conway into some wetland areas. So it's also had a Department of Ecology cleanup there. And ultimately, I'm not trying to get all political here, but we do have to look at what we use to fuel our lives and fuel our economy. And, the BP Gulf spill in 2010, the Taylor oil spill, which is still ongoing. It's the largest oil spill. It's been spilling since 2004 in Louisiana. You see all of this stuff. I one of the picture of the plume of down or near downtown Bellingham, there's a picture of kids sitting on the roof watching the fire from their house. And it reminds me of that picture of the kid watching the giant smoke plume in East Palestine in Ohio. That giant smoke plume. And, it is a oil infrastructure, fossil fuels overall. It's just like a dangerous game. And eventually, we have accidents with that. In every energy production sector, there's dangers, but some are more dangerous than others, and fossil fuels especially. Hydrocarbons like gasoline and oil, flammable liquids are ultimately dangerous. And the fact that that level of negligence, in my opinion, killed 3 people, killed 3 children, is unacceptable. And that pipeline still runs today. It's not like they stopped running that pipeline.
Right.
It wasn't like, oh, our bad, we won't do this ever again.
Yeah. No. I don't know if this is maybe... I think this is a good transition point for me to ask this, but how do you think the culture of Bellingham changed after this happened? Do you think there... Because I feel like Bellingham has this reputation of being very hippie. It's like what everybody thinks of it as. Who doesn't live here? It's like the green environmentalist city. Right. It's like a leftist city. Right. Do you think that culture might stem out of this? Like, do you think this event maybe radicalized people to be very environmentally focused and politically active? And, like, we see things like the coal train, for example, which was a big problem in, I think it was 2015, too, 2016, or 2014, somewhere in that range, when they were trying to run a new coal train through Bellingham, and there was a lot of political protest against that train being allowed to run through city limits. Right. Which I believe it was ultimately banned from running through city limits, correct? With open air coal.
I don't know. I don't think so.
I feel like that's right.
I think that they run it.
I don't know.
Because I've seen coal trains pass through. The coal train does run because it's coal from...
The new coal train, or is it the old coal train? Was it like I think this was like a new train that they were trying to run.
Yeah, it was a new train they were proposing.
And that train doesn't run, does it? I can't remember what ever came out of it. I just remember the protesting.
No, I think they run it. Just like the oil trains, they run it because it goes to Canada.
Okay, well, you can remove that if you would like.
No, but I get what you're saying, though.
Yeah, so there was the protest in, like, 2014 to 2016. I'm pretty sure it was 2014.
Mm-hmm.
For the new coal train and, like, explaining the environmental impacts that would have on people. So I just feel like we are very environmentally focused. Do you think that's a result? A culture shift happened because of that? Like, what sort of changes do you think happened in the city?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that a lot of people who were going to Western and going to high school at the turn of the century had something like this happen. You know, most students are still are still at Western until what, like the third week of June or the second week of June?
It's at least the second week. It's pretty early. It's not the third week for sure. It could even be the first week, but it could have been in class in session, or it could be out of session. It really just depends.
Yeah, June 10th was the second week on a Thursday.
So maybe.
Finals could have still been going on.
Yeah, exactly.
I would assume that it was a huge culture shift for people in high school, especially since one of their fellow classmates died. Like I said, the documentary that the city has, which will be linked in the show notes, has people who were there and people who grew up in the area. So, I mean, you hear that from them that they clearly notice this. I think also what it does is heighten a lot of those conflicts because, I mean, if you come to Bellingham now, you can see people who have We Love Cherry Point stickers, and there's a lot of people who are like, clearly like, we need to get off of fossil fuels. And I don't know how much of that is just a function of the time, but I definitely know that there's some native Bellinghamers that probably have that feeling from that incident. I mean, once you see a plume like that go up in your city, it kind of makes it hard for you to forget. Right.
And also, I think, I wonder how many... Oh my God. I do wonder how many people who were not around don't even know about this, though.
A lot.
Yeah. A lot. This is such a transplant city because of people coming for school.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm a transplant technically, too.
I mean, yeah, we technically both are, right? So...
However, it was talked about in the area.
For you,
because I moved here.
Right. We moved around the same time.
Yeah. I lived here, for clarification.
I guess this is back before.
For the listener. I moved here in the early 2000s and then moved back.
Right. So this is the first time you moved back. So it's actually earlier than... Yeah. So by 2006, people... I have never heard of this before I moved to Bellingham, and I lived an hour south.
Yeah.
We
also went to Bella's Fair, and you could see the damage from Bella's, like from the highway.
In 2003 or 4?
Into like 2002.
Yeah.
Yeah, into like 2000. 2001, 2000. No, yeah, 2001, 2000. 2000, 2001, 2002. Yep. You could see from the highway, like... an explosion happened and it damaged the land clearly, so you didn't know what the scale of it was, but it looked like a forest fire came through.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember that, but that was before all that Barkley stuff where we live and all the stuff behind there.
Don't dox us.
Oh, dang. But you could tell that it's back where Barkley, like before Barkley was developed, like, all of Barkley basically didn't exist in the form that it exists now. Basically, the farthest south the town really was the mall, or north, opposite. Okay. The farthest north the town really was the mall, and all those neighborhoods that are around, like, were very much outside of Bellingham.
Did they not have a Costco?
I don't remember. My parents didn't. I don't think my parents had a Costco membership when I was that young. Yeah, I'm just curious. We lived on the East Coast, so we had Sam's Club.
Right.
So it's a little bit different. But yeah, I think that the culture split is a real thing from that, because there is, like, the I mean, Whatcom County's Sierra Club is a very powerful environmental group within the state, and there's a lot of environmental advocacy groups based out of Bellingham in northwestern Washington. So, like you were talking about the coal train, oil protests are very common in western Washington.
Yeah.
And it's not uncommon to have people challenge the right of a company to make profit over the environment, especially how delicate our ecosystem is here. Which I'm not saying not every place is delicate, but the Pacific Northwest's waterways, once they get oil in them, basically kiss the orcas, kiss the salmon, kiss all of these things that are a part of our culture goodbye. And we're just one big accident away from it happening. And I don't like to think about that much because of the possibility. But yeah, but in closing, you know, it could happen again. That's another thing that I want people to always have in their mind. I'm not saying that I want it to happen again, but that pipelines rupture and they explode and they leak. Sometimes they leak and you don't even notice it. Sometimes they leak in the company. I'm not saying this company in particular, but companies in general might just be like, well, that's an acceptable ratio of leaked product.
Right, it's your line math of, is it too expensive to fix versus how much we'll pay in court fees or whatever.
Right. So, in this case, you know, it weighed the other direction, and it caused legislation, but it's ultimately a business decision. This was a choice companies made. That these were, in a way, these were social murders. They were killed because a boardroom decision rather than people's choices. Like, these were kids. They were just having fun in the park. They shouldn't have died. It's important to remember that. And it's important to remember their names and their families, and, you know, remember while we're having our holiday season that, you know, still to this day, there are some who don't have that loved one with them, and it's important to remember why and go into the next year wanting to change the way things are so that doesn't happen again. So that's the episode for me. Like I said, show notes will be included. I actually went deep into the archives. I went into industry papers, court rulings. I also went into the old Seattle Post-Intelligencer archive. I miss them. I mean, they're around, but just not in the same way that they used to be.
The PI is a very reputable newspaper still.
It is, in my opinion, the best Seattle newspaper.
That's sort of the reputation it has as, for, you know, as I went to a journalism school.
Yeah.
The PI is like sort of the paper everybody who was really serious reporting, who really wanted to be a serious reporter. That's where they kind of tried to get into, was the PI.
When I was a person who wanted to become a journalist at one point, I wanted to work for the Seattle PI.
That was your dream job?
Yeah. Because that was when they still delivered newspapers.
Yeah.
We would get one at the middle school and the high school every week. and I'd read it because you get the Seattle Times too. And this is before you could go online to get newspaper access. And Seattle Times always just had like the worst takes. Like their editorials were garbage. This is an opinion. But their editorials were not great, and their reporting was very like, I just printed out the police press record, press statement. Yeah. But then the PI just like went into it. They talked about motive. They talked about a story from like 3 years ago that they covered and dug into it,
Well, they have different purposes, and the PI allows more room for, it's not like 24-hour news cycle as much as the Times is, right? Like they allow more time for in-depth reporting versus trying to produce a newspaper every day. I don't know how often the PI produces a newspaper, but anyway, it allows for more freedom in that way.
Yeah, I'm just glad to be able to use, properly researched stories. Like the story about the court cases and stuff come from this. So I'm glad that you were able to sit through this. It's a really hard, like I said, it's a very hard story. We're going to have more exciting and fun stuff coming up. Thinking about Seattle Super Bowl against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Oh, no.
I'm also thinking about doing a episode about Seattle or Washington being a winterpocalypse state, despite what everyone says about.
Yeah.
I've been digging deep in the records of NOAA weather stations in this area to test the hypothesis of how many times it snows in Western Washington.
Okay.
And I'm going to bring a spreadsheet and a chart, and I'm putting to an end that it never really snows in Washington story, or at least Western Washington lowlands.
Yeah, certainly not here in Bellingham.
Yeah.
Hopefully this will be your last depressing story?
For now. For this season, yeah. I'm going to try to expand to more just generally...
more fun stuff.
I wanted to get this one in because of the year. It is an important event.
Right.
And it's timely because people who are still here with us are impacted by it. So it's not just ancient history. But I'm hoping to... The Super Bowl one's going to be a good one.
That one's also going to be depressing.
I think it's going to be hilarious. I'm going to be having a great time.
I'm not.
I didn't have a great time doing this episode, researching it.
Uh-huh.
But I'm going to have a great time
researching that one.
Reliving 2007. Oh. I'm going to have a huge, wide, dumb grin on my face the whole time.
All right, well, if that is the end of your episode...
This is where we leave you.
You can follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. You can leave us a review if you choose to do so. You can also send us an email at whatthewashington@gmail.com. We will probably be creating social media sites of some kind, even though I have some dread in my voice about that, just so you can stay up to date, because how are we going to let you know when a new season is starting or when we're calling for content? You know what I mean? So
yeah, we kind of came out of left field with the season start.
Surprise dropping seasons over here because we have no way to officially communicate. So we'll create some sort of social media in the next few weeks. But if you have like a preference, you can email that to us.
Or if you have a topic that you think that you want dug into, Mikayla and I will say one thing, grade A
researchers. Thanks.
We're grade A researchers.
Yeah.
I will say that much.
Yeah, you can send us requests. I don't know, whatever you feel like sending us. If you want to, like, request somebody comes on the pod, send them in. We'll see what we can do. You know, we're open to suggestions. We're open to creativity. This is a dialogue. This is not a monologue.
Right. And the episodes that we've had with guests...
Right. Are very fun.
It's been really fun. So I'm excited to do more of those.
Okay, so it's already a dialogue because there's two of us.
Conversation.
This is a conversation, not a dialogue.
We're upgraded.
I feel like those are two synonymous, but whatever.
I don't think so. I think a dialogue is two, a conversation is multiple people.
Okay. Anyway, reach out to us, and I think that's all from us.
Happy holidays to everyone.
Have a good start of 2025. We will see you next year.
Peace.
Bye.